Hello everyone and welcome to Code Rhetoric with Tam Talk. In today's video, we will be discussing modifiers. Today we will be focusing on modifier 59 as well as the X modifiers. In our review on today's video, we'll discuss the modifier description, definition. I will provide a brief explanation as well as the brief tip. Here I will explain a little bit about modifier 59. So modifier 59 is assigned to CPT procedural and or service codes to identify a procedure that is one distinct or independent from other non-E&M services that the provider performs on the same day. And for those of you who are new to coding, E&M represents evaluation and management services. Modifier 59 is also applied to procedure and or services that are typically not reported together, but are appropriate in specific situations. And I'll go into detail as we proceed through the video. Modifier 59 also tells the payer or the insurance company or carrier that the same provider does not ordinarily perform one procedure with another procedure for the same patient on the same day. And I'm going to repeat that because you'll see how this one statement applies to the X modifiers. So again, I'll repeat. Again, modifier 59 tells the payer or the insurance carrier or company that the same provider does not ordinarily perform one procedure with another procedure for the same patient on the same day. As we discussed about, modifier 59, there are some things or documentation that supports or things that we need to look for in the documentation in order to ensure that when we assign the modifier 59, that it is applicable to that particular encounter. And so some of those things are, or this is the exhaustive list, is there must be a different encounter or session. There should be a different surgery or procedure. There should be a different organ system or body area. There should be a separate incision or excision. There should be a separate lesion, and or there should be a separate injury. So these are some of the things that you would need to look for in order to determine if modifier 59 is applicable to that specific encounter. Does all of these things have to happen or be documented within one encounter? No, it could be on at least one of these things. Now, does that mean that all of these things won't be encompassed in one patient encounter? No, I'm not saying that neither. So again, these are things that we need to look for or to identify as we're reading through the provider's documentation to determine whether or not modifier 59 should be applied. And my little keynote or footnote here also states that to append modifier 59, and to only append that is if there aren't any other or more appropriate modifiers to explain the circumstance. And this is where those X modifiers come in. So the X modifiers, they weren't always there. And this is for those who've been in the coding industry for a while. These are fairly new modifiers. And so I like to call them the babies or the subset of modifier 59. Modifier 59 is the mother modifier, and the X modifiers are the subset or the babies of modifier 59. Okay, so modifier 59 tip per the CPT coding guidelines. The first thing we want to do is watch out for our code descriptors, as in we want to make sure we're reading those code descriptors carefully. Some code descriptors include the words such as separate procedure, which tells you that the procedure is separate from other procedures performed on the same patient, and it is appropriate to append modifier 59. A good example of that would be of the separate procedure code descriptor would be CPT code 45378, which represents the colonoscopy, basically just the viewing or the tour, I call it the tour, of the colon. Okay. So in that case, like I said, the guideline states that This procedure may be warranted a modifier 59, excuse me. The other code descriptors include multiple procedures, a primary procedure with additional procedures bundled under one code. In this case, do not append modifier 59 to these codes, okay? Verify through the NCCI or the National Correct Coding Initiative edits. The NCCI edits will tell you if a set of codes can be reported together and if modifier 59 is applicable. Now, for those of you who are new to the coding industry or studying to become a coder, the NCCI edits are either built into the practice management systems, or your coding department should have some type of resource such as Encoder, so that you're able to have access to the NCCI edits. So whenever you're trying to determine if modifiers or a certain modifier is applicable, you're able to input those codes to see what the edits are stating. And then lastly, you want to make sure you understand the difference between modifier 59 and 51, or should I say 51 and 59. Modifier 51 is for multiple procedures, unbundled procedures, and they may be assigned per the specific guidelines. Whereas modifier 59 tips the payer off to let them know that certain procedures that were performed are not normally done together. So again, you want to make sure you are clear in your understanding of modifier 51 as well as modifier 59. And we'll discuss in more detail how modifier 59 or we'll say the X modifiers should be applied. So now we're entering into our X modifiers. Again, these are the subsets of modifier 59. So our first one here is XE. And pretty much we are to assign XE when the provider performs a service on a patient at separate encounters on the same date of service. So if I go back and use the example of the upper EGD and a colonoscopy, let's say the surgeon perform the colonoscopy at 8 a.m. and then perform the EGD at 10. So, and of course, this is with the same provider, okay? So that provider or the coder for that provider should be assigning modifier XE to the colonoscopy or the EGD, however the NCCI suggests or recommends that it should be assigned. Okay, this does not apply if the patient saw Dr. A at 8 and then saw Dr. J at 10, but Dr. J is with a totally different practice, totally different entity. He's down the street. Dr. J wouldn't know that Dr. A performed the colonoscopy at 8 a.m. I mean, they will know, but they won't know at the time of the encounter because Dr. J is performing something totally unrelated to what I'm going to say Dr. A performed at 8 a.m. Okay? So in the example, it says XE modifier may be payable with a particular code pair or code set where modifier 59 may not be applicable, okay? So the tip is the contractors recognize modifier XE as a separate modifier, and the system allows the provider to report multiple lines with modifier 59 and the XE modifier. However, and this is a very strong however, the system aggregates, which means they will combine those lines with the XE modifier along with the lines containing the modifier 59 whenever it collects the modifier 59 lines. So what does that mean when you say combine aggregates? So if it is applicable, they will again combine those line items and then they will review and reimburse as such. Okay, so adding the modifier 59, thinking you're adding the extra level of protection, is actually not going to add an extra level of protection. It's just the systems are going to aggregate it, combine it, and review and reimburse as such. So here we have modifier XP, which is to be assigned when a service is performed by a different practitioner or provider. Now, the difference between the XP and the XE is The XE represented a different service or procedure, right? Or excuse me, but yeah, hold on, I'm getting confused myself. Performed by a different practitioner or provider. Okay, so we're back. So XE represents the different procedures, right? And of course that's going to be by different providers. The XP represents the different providers, okay? But this is different in the sense of it was at the same encounter, okay? So let's say we have Dr. A and Dr. J are in the same group, same specialty or what have you. And so a patient is coming in, Dr. A is doing a distinct part or doing a different procedure, but it's during the same counter. The patient is still on the table, the patient is still cut open. Then Dr. J comes in and performs his distinct part or his procedure on the patient during that same encounter. So as a coder and as the providers as well, they should be assigned an XP. The XP again is going to represent which doctor did what procedure and so on, and the other. And so, again, as with the tip, again, the contractors are going to recognize modifier XP as well as modifier 59. However, if you're putting modifier 59 on there for that added protection or layer or what have you, again, that contractor or insurance carrier is going to combine those and review and reimburse as such. Okay. And lastly, we have modifier XU. So with modifier XU, it represents when the provider performs a procedure that doesn't overlap usual components of the main service. It's almost like it mimics 51 in a sense because it is not overlapping, it's not a part of a major or main component or main procedure. So this, in this case, you would assign modifier XU. And again, the same tip applies to this one as well. Again, okay, you try to pad it with modifier 59. Again, they're going to aggregate or combine those line items. So lastly, I'll leave you with some coding tips, and these are general coding tips, not one that are specific to the modifiers that we just reviewed, but excuse me, tips that, again, that you could carry throughout your coding career in your day-to-day coding. So the first one is to always review each encounter on a case-by-case basis. For example, if you're working in a particular area of coding or say a specialty, a subspecialty, and you may see some of the same procedures or same CPT codes come across your computer screen. It's very important not to become comfortable and just make the assumption that encounters B through Z are similar to that of encounter A. Keep in mind we are dealing with different patients. Each patient has different diagnoses or being managed differently. So you want to make sure that you are, again, reviewing those encounters on a case-by-case basis. Also, you want to make sure you are assigning the appropriate modifiers. There may be some cases that may not require a modifier, and then there may be cases that will require a modifier. So you want to make sure you are assigning the appropriate modifiers. Identify the payer. I know for those of us who've been in the industry for a minute, it's like, oh, but that's what billers do. I'm a coder, I just want to code. But it's still important that you are familiar with the payer. Billing and coding is a team. And so you want to make sure that you have some indication or idea of what that payer expectations are as it relates to the coding and their coding guidelines. Always remember to code to the highest specificity, whether that be with your CPT coding, your ICD-10 coding, HCPCS, or any other areas of coding. You want to make sure you're coding to the highest specificity. You want to make sure your codes represent what actually transpired during the encounter with the healthcare provider and the patient. And then lastly, when in doubt, always refer to your coding guidelines or query the healthcare provider. With the query, there may be times, not often, but there may be times where a provider will lead you to believe that they are working on the right side of the body. And as you review the actual record or the document, you may see where the doctor begins to talk about the left side. So you just need to query the provider to make sure that either they're working on the left or the right, or perhaps they're working on both sides. And so, yeah, so it's important that you query the provider, or at least follow the process or the steps or guidance from your coding leadership. But again, when in doubt, never forsake reading your coding guidelines. Okay, guys, so that concludes our session again on modifiers. For those of you who are interested in learning more or to follow me, of course, I'm here on YouTube at Code Rhetoric with Tam Talk. If you want to be a subscriber at my website, it is at www.abrahammedicalcodingcoachllc.com. I also blog for coding, and that is called the Medical Coder Post. You can follow us on Facebook. We have a Facebook page. We're also on Instagram as well as Tumblr. Thank you.